Buba, buba, buba seperti buba. Miss Stinky, Miss Stinky. No longer Miss Stinky. Miss Mary. Hello, hello. Hold on. I'm gonna fix this. Hello, I'm back. If you stuck around, you probably seen the first part of the vlog, which is set in Belgrade when I was there. The other part is me yammering about the books that I read recently. One of them is fiction. No, one of them is nonfiction. The others are fiction. We'll start first with the nonfiction book, which is Possibilities by David Graeber, Essays on Hierarchy, Rebellion, and Desire. It is a book divided in three parts. First two parts are dealing with his research time in Madagascar when he was researching the Malagasy rituals of bone carrying, ancestral bone carrying. He was researching also cultural understanding of authority in Malagasy culture, and he was connecting that with various different aspects. The last part is his involvement in direct action movements and basically lessons that he drew from those involvements. It's sort of like essays that are first moments of his reflections that will lead to him writing two other books about it, that is Direct Action and The Democracy Project. So in case you're interested to get familiar with his work and you are not used to reading a lot of academic work, I would not recommend that you start with this book, but I would recommend that you start with The Democracy Project, Bullshit Jobs, and The Debt. The other books are more or less more academic, and especially these two first parts in Possibilities, because they are anthropological research that he did in Madagascar during the 1980s and early 1990s, that is 1989 to 1991, and this was also part of his PhD. So it's rather dense, and at times, and it was also very difficult for me to read it, simply because I'm not used to reading a lot of anthropological academic works, and it was challenging. But nevertheless, I enjoyed it, especially because I'm using him for my own PhD, and it was rather gratifying to read it. I also read two novels and one, I would say, nonfiction, like essay collection. First one I would like to talk about is Scary Monsters. I actually had this book for 2 years on my shelves, and I realized that I have this author, Michel de Kretser, on my shelves when Cass was presenting another book that is going to be published now in April or a little bit later. I'm not really sure what the exact date of publication is, but then I checked it out and I realized I have her earlier novel. This novel is divided in two parts. It follows two different characters and it's set in two different geographic locations and two different times. The first story, which is this side of the book, is set in south of France, in Montpellier, where the main character is teaching English. She's on the teacher exchange program, and this is happening during the 1980s, so we get a lot of cultural references regarding the 80s music, fashion, and just in general the culture. The whole part is basically about her own experience in south of France with her colleagues, own experience with French culture, learning French and trying to survive as a young Australian woman who has a Sri Lankan background. So it's about identity, it's about racism that she experiences. It covers various aspects of her placement in the world as a young woman who has migrant living experience and who comes from migrant family and is going through a sort of identity crisis because of her background, complicated background. The other part is about the family coming from Sri Lanka, but they are moving to Australia, and this is happening in the future. It's a dystopian future in Australia. Islam as a religion has been banned, and there are various other authoritarian laws that are passed. It's like a weird amalgamation of normalization of fascism, but in a rather, I would say, Handmaid's Tale style. One aspect that actually stood out for me was the normalization of euthanasia when it comes to people with terminal illness, especially elderly, and people with disabilities. And it's this aspect of dehumanization that is present in the story which struck me the most. So the main character is working for a government agency that is in charge of basically collecting data and checking whether citizens have committed serious crimes and checking whether they are eligible for deportation. His wife is also working in a corporate setting and they are quite money orientated. She in particular, and the way she lives her life, you can see that she's really focused on herself. Even though they have children and they have his mother who lives with them until a certain point, she is very egocentrically present in the lives of these family members. And by the end of their story, we see actually the reckoning of this egocentrism, that it is part of this normalization of dehumanization that the government is enacting through various laws and manipulating the information through media and so on. I mean, we are kind of going through that right now. I didn't enjoy reading this. It was heartbreaking at times. The first story that was set in the 1980s France didn't really strike a chord with me as much as the other story, but I think the light weight of that story balanced out the heaviness that you feel in the second story, so the second part of the book. So I've really appreciated that in a way, and I guess you can read it either way because they are not connected in any way, so you can read whichever story you choose first. Next one is Small Bodies of Water by Nina Mingya Powles. This was recommended to me by Renee from So I Read This Book. And I had it for a while on my shelves as well. I think maybe a year or two. I enjoyed reading this, but it was, for my taste, a bit fragmentary. It's sort of like diaries and reflections that Nina has on her own identity, very complex identity, and that is rooted in migratory cycles or circles that her family made. She is born, if I'm not mistaken, in New Zealand, but then her family moved to New York, I think, and lived there for a while. Then they would return. But her mom's family comes originally from China, and her grandparents moved to Malaysia. So it's like a mixed bag of cultures, experiences, and her identity is rather fluid. So she's using a relationship that she has with water and swimming to kind of show the fluidity of this identity that she has, that she doesn't really feel like she's one or the other, but she's many. and how complex and complicated that can be in a world that only understands identity in a rather black and white way. And I really enjoyed the parts where she's obsessing about this might sound a little bit odd, but I really enjoyed the parts where she's obsessing about natural disasters, especially earthquakes and tsunamis. The city that she grew up in New Zealand, I guess, is earthquake prone. It's like it's an area that experiences a lot of earthquakes, and there's a lot of this paranoia and prediction based news, whether an earthquake is going to hit, if it hits, what kind of damage it might cause, how this might look, what might happen, whether there might be a tsunami or not. And it reminded me of this essay that I read in Orhan Pamuk's novel, well, actually, collection of essays as well, where he is talking about his obsession with earthquakes, as Istanbul is also in the region which is quite prone to frequent earthquakes. How he spent days with his friend calculating the potential trajectory of a minaret on one of the mosques that is close to his office, and what are the chances of that minaret actually falling on the building of his office and assassinating him actually, but like killing him. It was a rather strange story. It's very short, I think like few pages. I will put the name of the book in the description down below, but it was, as much as it was funny to read, that much it was worrying, especially for me, because at the time I was traveling to Istanbul. So I would not recommend you read that before you take your trip to Turkey. I would recommend this if you would like to explore various parts of someone's life, because she's technically writing a diary, but it's rather fast read. But I would have liked her to have gone maybe deeper into certain topics that she covered. The next one and the last book is Paul by Daisy Lafarge. This is a novel about a young woman who is running away from something that happened in Paris. We are not immediately told what is this something that happened in Paris, but we find out much later, and she is volunteering on this farm in south part of France that she found through this website that connects volunteers with farms that need extra hands during the summer. And she meets this owner of the farm whose name is Paul and starts a relationship with him. I have to say that this novel deals with partner violence, and it was rather triggering for me. It was very well explored, the whole boiling of the frog slowly into violent relationship. What I mean by that is, like, Daisy was really, really good, and I don't think that you're able to write this unless you've been through it yourself. But she was very, very good in depicting the slow process, the chipping at one's confidence in a relationship with someone who is psychologically violent at first, and at one point it becomes also physical because it's inevitable. And it kept me going because I wanted to see what will happen, whether she will be able to untangle herself out of this relationship. Spoiler alert, she does, but the way this happens was a bit disturbing for me. She didn't do it particularly because she felt that she is being harmed. Maybe that's just the way I felt the story develop, but rather because he did something to someone else. And that part is also very, very upsetting and disturbing. But it affected me in a way that she didn't feel that she had the strength to pull away until she found like a perfect reason of the harm caused to someone else to manage to grab to the last ounces of strength and leave the relationship. If you are triggered by these kind of stories, I wouldn't recommend it, but it does keep you on your toes, and it does, there are a lot of triggering moments. For me, one of the worst triggering moments was when, I think it was like a first morning, she is going downstairs to the kitchen to have a breakfast, and they're having a conversation, and at one point he tells her that she should be a little bit quiet because everybody's sleeping. And in that moment she reflects that she didn't realize that she was so loud, and she starts whispering, and they continue to have this conversation in whispers, while at the same time he starts banging his cup against the table, banging with different kind of dishes around the kitchen, and actually raising his voice at one point. And that moment I realized that he's got his claws into her, and because of her own insecurities and lack of confidence, she struggles to say no to him throughout the novel until a certain point. So if you have the guts to read it, read it. I think it's also a very good educational material for anyone to understand how these relationships work and how you might get pulled into one yourself unknowingly. Yeah, so thank you, Daisy, for writing this novel, even though it was quite infuriating at times. So that's it of the books I read. I hope you enjoyed the reviews, and I hope you enjoyed the first part of the vlog. And I will have additional videos very soon for you, and hope you stick around. Have a good day. Bye.